Welcome to this overview of PXF Deep Resample. So PXF Deep Resample is a new tool in Pixelfudger version 3 that enables you to reduce the amount of samples in a deep image. So this is a tool that's sorely missing in the built-in deep tools in Nuke, and it enables you to reduce deep file sizes significantly in some cases. So why do we need it? Well, here's an example. I have made a little animation in Nuke with the Nuke particle system, and I've rendered it with motion blur, so multi-sampling and anti-aliasing. I've got my animation here. I'm pretty happy with it. However, I intend to mix those balls with some other deep images, so I need the balls to be rendered as a deep image sequence. A regular non-deep image sequence will not do for what I want to do, so I've put a deep right after my scanline render, and now I'm bringing in my deep render using a deep read. So here's my deep read here, and notice that my non-deep image is 21 megs. That's for the 100 frames, so the whole sequence is only 21 megs. So even with AOVs like a depth pass, this is only 21 megs. The whole deep render is 1 gigabyte, so about 50 times bigger. So this inflated quite a bit when I rendered it with deep, and I was wondering why until I put a deep sample on my image. And if I put a deep sample on a random ball here, you'll notice that for that 1 pixel here under the jack, I have 100 samples, all a tiny fraction of a unit on top of each other. So Nuke, for some reason, when you turn on anti-aliasing and multi-sampling, just keeps stacking more and more and more deep samples on top of each pixel. And this is complete overkill. I do not need 100 samples to describe that 1 pixel. I really only need 1 sample here. The only places where I need more than 1 sample is if you have 2 balls on top of each other here. Now you should have 2 samples, 1 for the green ball and 1 for the yellow ball that's transparent in the front. Nuke put 192 samples for that 1 pixel. So this is complete overkill, and this is why my render is 1 gigabyte large on disk. So I put my render, my full render, through PXF Deep Resample, and this is the result here. My render shrunk from 1 gigabyte or 1,000 megabytes to 46 megabytes. So that's a 23x reduction. So this is 23 times smaller than this. So if we put our deep resample on the new version, the smaller version, you'll notice that if I look here, I only have 1 sample for that yellow ball, and whenever there's transparency, then I have 2 samples, 1 for the yellow ball in the foreground and 1 for the green ball in the background, as it should. This is all I need. So this is still a deep image. This has all the benefits of a deep image. I can do deep holdouts, deep merges, deep crops. This is a full deep RGBA image. This is not even deep opacity, and this is a full-on deep render with all the benefits of deep, and I didn't lose any quality or benefits by resampling my image, but I did gain a lot of speed and disk space by shrinking my render from 1 gigabyte all the way down to 46 megs, which is not that much bigger than the non-deep version. So this is a really good example of why you would want to use PXF Deep Resample. So let's have a look with a different image on how to actually use PXF Deep Resample. Okay, so now we have another example. I've made myself a little energy beam effect in Nuke. So I have a bunch of cards with noise on them and displacement and so on, and I'm rendering it with a scanline render, of course. And this is my energy cloud effect that I've created, and I want to combine that with a 3D render that I was given from the 3D department. So this is a beautiful 3D alien that was given to me, and it was given to me RGBA Z, so I do have a depth pass, so I can convert this guy to deep using deep from image, so that works, and I can combine it with my energy cloud with a deep merge, and now I'm pretty happy. Everything is working as expected. This noise that should be in front is in front, the noise that should be in back is in back. Everything's cool. However, this is a bit slow to render. I wish I could pre-render it, and I don't want to pre-render it after the deep merge in a regular write, because I'm expecting new versions of the alien. The alien will change soon, so I don't want to bake the alien with my energy cloud. I just want to pre-render my energy cloud as a deep render so I can use it down the line without having to re-render it all the time. So I've put myself a deep write here, and I've already pre-rendered it and brought it in as a deep read, and everything should work here. So if I use the deep read instead of the scanline render and combine it with my alien, this is still working as expected. I'm pretty happy with this. However, I'm not very happy with the file size here. So if I look at my deep read, this is 4.5 gigabytes on disk, which isn't that much until you realize this is a tiny 24 frame sequence at 1280 by 720, which is minuscule by today's standards. So if we extrapolate a little bit using a fancy math, we can see that if our clip had been 1920 by 1080, it would be 10 gigs. If it was 4K Ultra HD, it would be 40 gigs, 40, which is insane. So what's happening? Well, let's find out. Let's bring a deep sample. And sample just a random pixel here in the middle, and we can see we have about 14 samples, which is not outrageous. We've got 17, 18, 20 samples. It depends on which pixel we look at. So deep sample tells me I have a reasonable amount of samples, but it's still a lot. Maybe I don't need that much. So to reduce the amount of samples, I could use a PXF deep resample. So let's bring one in. Go, and I'm going to connect that down here, and if we put our viewer, it seems nothing changed. It looks the same. So if we look at before and after, visually it looks the same. The deep sampling might be different. So if we put a deep sample on it, you can see that we've shrunk from 20 samples to 6. But before we look at that, we need to adjust some things. So let's go back to the deep resample here, and first we need to tell deep resample the extent of our scene. So how far in front of the camera we have things that we care about. So in this case, it's pretty busy. You could use a deep sample to figure it out. So if we use a deep sample and we look at the frame, we can sort by deep front here, and you can see the closest sample on that pixel. It's about 10 or 11 units in front of the lens, and the farthest sample in the back is about 62 units in the background. So about 10 to 60. It really depends on where in the frame we look. Another way to guesstimate this would be to use a deep to points. So let's bring that in. So I've got my deep to points here connected to my camera, the viewer on it, and we can use Nuke's scale. So the big square is 100 units, so the small squares are 10 units each, so you can guesstimate it a little bit. So from the camera we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares, so about 70 units to cover. So the range that we care about, where we have stuff that we wish to resample, in this case would be from about, a few units in front of camera, let's say 5 units, all the way to 70 units. So we're gonna tell our deep resample that's what we want to do. So the close stuff is 5 units to camera, and the far away stuff is 70 units to camera. And now if we look at our deep resample, we should have a more efficient resample here. Let's go check out what we're getting. So now I have about 10 samples for each pixels, as opposed to 20 originally. So if I look originally, I have some pixels that have 20 samples, whereas now that same pixel is now 10 samples. So what happened? Deep resample actually is compressing a bunch of slices together. So if we look at it from the deep to points point of view, we can turn on, we can plug our deep resample into deep to points, of course, and look at it. So already you can see a difference. So if you look at the full version, it's different a little bit from the resampled version. So we have a little bit less stuff going on. To make more sense out of it, we can go in on the PXF deep resample and turn on view deep slices. So it's going to assign random colors to each slice. So now we can see a little bit more what's happening. We've got 10 slices, and within each slice we're only allowed one sample per pixel. Every pixel could be anywhere within the slice, so it can have its own depth different to its neighbor, but we cannot have two different depth values for a single pixel within a single slice, meaning that if we have 10 slices, the maximum number of samples we could have in our deep image is 10 samples. We could have less if there's not a lot of stuff going on in some area of the frame, but we cannot have more. So the maximum amount of samples is 10. Actually, it is 10 plus 2 because we have extra slices in the front and the back. We'll talk about that in a second. So here we have our 10 slices. If we reduce the amount of slices, let's say 5 slices, then it's gonna recompute. And now we have 5 slices. So obviously we start at the same spot and end at the same spot. We have less slices, meaning each slice is thicker. So now we only have 5 samples. If we look at our deep resample now, we can see that we have 5, 6 samples. Again, this is 5 plus 2 really, so maximum 7. So now we've desampled our image quite a bit. We've got funky colors because we've got view deep slices turned on, so let's turn that off. So notice that we've lost quite a bit of deep information, but we didn't lose any RGB information. If we compare the full render to our resampled image, it looks exactly the same, but we lost some deep precision. So if we use the resampled version to combine with our alien, now we'll notice we might have some errors. So if I compare with the original, notice that this is what it should look like, and if I use the resampled, I have stuff that should be behind that has been now pushed in front, because now I don't have enough depth resolution to accurately describe that part of the image. This may or may not be a problem. In some cases, you may not care. If you have a very chaotic scene or it's a very subtle effect of smoke and so on, you might want to say, I don't really care about imperfections like that. I'm going to take the file size saving any day. Or you can use a low-res version to work with and then switch to the high-res version when you're ready to do your real render. So there's a lot of potential here. In our case, I think we've went too far. So 5 samples is very low for a complex scene like this. So 20 samples isn't too bad, but it's still bigger than I wish it was. I want that file size to be smaller. So to make that more efficient, what I should do is I should keep a lot of samples around the alien, but I should get rid of samples behind this alien and in front of the alien. I don't need lots of depth information for the hundreds of units between the camera and the nose of the alien. All of that could be compressed into one sample. So to do that, we need to figure out where the sample is in 3 dimensions or in depth. So to figure out where the alien is, I need a deep to points of the alien. So I'm going to switch my deep to points from the energy cloud to the alien. That's where the alien is. And I'm going to copy paste my camera here. I don't want to mess with my render camera. And I'm going to use the near and far values to figure out where the alien is. So my alien is somewhere around, let's say 10 units, or let's say 8 units in front of a camera, and the tail of the alien is somewhere around 25 units. So now we can optimize our scene and keep a lot of depth resolution in that area and throw away all the depth resolution, or most of the depth resolution, in front and behind the alien. So now that we know our extent, 8 to 25, we can punch that into deep resample. I want my near to be at 8 and my far to be at 25. And to make it easier to understand what's going on, I'm going to turn off the far and the near slice, and I'm going to connect that back to my deep points. Here we go. So now essentially we're throwing away all the deep samples from 0 to 8 and all the deep samples from 25 to infinity. So these are gone. Our image now is different. We're missing bits because we turned off the near slice and the far slice here. And if we turn on the view deep slices, go back to deep points, now we have still 5 slices, but they're much thinner because instead of spanning the whole scene, we're only using our 5 slices for that small area in the middle here. If we need a little bit more, we could of course change that down to 10 slices. And now we have 10 slices in the region around the alien. Of course, we may not want to throw away all the stuff in front and behind of the alien, so we could turn on these 2 values. Nuke doesn't really like it when I turn those on with the deep points, so let's go put our viewer somewhere else for a second. I don't want to crash. I'm going to turn all of these together, and now if we look at deep points, now we have essentially 12 slices. So 10 slices around the alien, 1 big slice in front of the alien, and 1 big slice behind the alien. So this should give us reasonable sampling to merge our alien. So now if I look at the result of our resampled image, I gotta turn off deep slices. Now we don't have errors. So if we combine it with the full res or the resampled image, I don't see any differences. So this looks well resampled and usable. So that's pretty good. Our camera is moving relative to the alien, so we would need to animate our near and far. One way to do this would be to use an animated camera. So we could use a deep points with an animated camera. Let's bring that in here like so. So the near and far has been animated on this camera to stay around the alien, and you could link the near and far animated values to your deep resample near and far values. So here, if we look at our result, I've got my full deep buffer here, and I'm resampling, and the near and far is animated using the values from the animated near and far from our camera. You do need to do a deep right, otherwise this is useless. You're just adding CPU processing. You're still reading the big file, and on top of it you're adding quite a bit of processing. This is not fast, but you only have to do it once. Once you do your deep right, you don't have to read the big file anymore. You can read only the small file. And once we've resampled our image, now we end up with a 1.5 gig file instead of 4.5 gigs. So we've reduced our file size about 3:1 here, which is not as spectacular as the balls, bouncing balls example, but it's still non-negligible. And of course, this scales quite a lot with bigger frames. So if we had rendered at 4K, we would have a 40 gig image sequence here. If we had a resampled version, then we would have only 13.5 gigs. So it's still non-negligible. It's still quite a bit of savings here. This is very, very useful, especially when you're getting gigantic deep renders and you know you don't need all that deep information. You just need deep information around a specific area of the scene. You can focus the samples only on the area that you care about and throw away the samples where you don't care about them. Last few things I need to talk about is the pickers. So here I have a scene that's a little bit simpler, less chaotic than my energy beam scene. So I could use the pickers to set my near and far. So here I have a new PXF deep resample. I'm going to connect it to my deep image. And you can use Z near and Z far with the pickers. So far pick, I'm going to pick the wall in the background, and near pick, I'm going to pick that box here. So it automatically sets the near to 200 units. This scene is in centimeters, so that makes sense. And the Z-far to 959. If I view the deep slices, then I can see the slices on the ground. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Slices here. So this is a quick way to set up your near and far if you have a scene that makes sense like that. And you can of course keyframe this, and every time you touch the pickers, the values of Z near and Z far will be updated. If you want to create some interpolation, you might want to have deep front and deep back separated. You want the deep back to be farther behind. You can adjust that using the sample thickness. So if I set the sample thickness to 0.5, then my deep back will be 0.5 behind my deep front. So it's a way to hide the lack of precision in your deep image. Under advanced, you can choose to crop each slice internally using a deep crop or a deep expression. Deep crop is faster, deep expression is more accurate. So if you have artifacts, you can try to switch to deep expressions. Depth method is how you want to assign the depth to each pixel. So notice that every pixel on each slice can live anywhere within that slice. So you can assign the depth using deep front, which is the most accurate. You can use depth, which is halfway between deep front and deep back. So this may help in some cases, but it's usually less accurate. You can use deep back. This is mostly experimental. I don't think it makes sense to use deep back. As you can see, all my background stuff is way too far behind now, but I've included it for completeness. And you can use slice depth. So every pixel on each slice will have the same depth now, and basically you get the average of the depth of the slice. So this is way less accurate. Again, this is for experimental purposes. It might help in some cases. Most of the time you will want to be on deep front, which is the default. You also have drop hidden samples. So this is the same as the deep merge option of the same name here. So this will hide samples that are behind other samples that are fully opaque. So if you have stuff that's opaque in the foreground, everything under those samples will get thrown away if drop hidden samples is turned on. If you need to keep stuff in the background because you're planning to do a deep crop or a deep holdout down the line, then you can uncheck this. So there you go. This is an overview of PXF deep resample. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.